The charity gala was supposed to be an evening of celebration and fundraising, one of those glittering events where celebrities gather to write checks and pose for photos, while supporting causes that make them look good to their publicists and tax advisors. But nobody expected the night to end with one of the world's most famous footballers walking off stage after delivering a verbal knockout that would dominate headlines for weeks and force an entire industry to confront the casual racism that had been hiding behind smiles and designer gowns for far too long. The venue was London's most exclusive hotel ballroom, filled with actors and musicians and athletes who had come together ostensibly to raise money for children's education in developing countries. Though most attendees seemed more interested in networking and being photographed than in learning about the actual work being funded by their presence. And the evening had proceeded exactly as these events always did, with speeches that said nothing meaningful and auction items that existed primarily to let wealthy people demonstrate their wealth to other wealthy people. Ronaldo had been reluctant to attend, his schedule packed with training and family commitments, but his management team had insisted that these appearances were necessary for maintaining his global brand, for showing that he cared about causes beyond football. Though he found most of these events to be exercises in performative charity that raised more money for event planners than for the people they claimed to help. And he sat at his assigned table looking politely bored, while celebrities took turns at the podium delivering speeches that their assistants had written and they had barely bothered to read beforehand. The comedian Marcus Bradley was scheduled to perform halfway through the evening, a British entertainer whose career had been built on observational humor and satirical takes on current events, though lately his material had taken a darker turn as he struggled to remain relevant in an entertainment landscape that was evolving faster than his willingness to evolve with it. And when he took the stage that night, his opening jokes were harmless enough, gentle jabs at celebrity culture and the absurdity of charity galas where people spent more on their outfits than most families earned in a year. But something in the audience's response seemed to encourage him to push boundaries that should have remained firmly in place. The first joke about Muslims was disguised as political commentary, a supposedly clever observation about immigration and cultural differences that drew uncomfortable laughter from an audience that wasn't sure whether they were supposed to find it funny or offensive. But when Bradley saw that some people were laughing, when he sensed that he could get a reaction by targeting a group that many in his predominantly white, wealthy audience viewed as outsiders, he decided to double down rather than backing away from territory that any decent person would have recognized as dangerous and wrong. "You know what I love about Muslims?" he continued, his voice taking on the mock innocent tone that comedians use when they want to say something terrible while pretending it's just harmless fun. They're so dedicated to their faith that they'll pray anywhere, even in airports, which is great for security because it gives everyone a chance to practice their sprinting. And the joke landed with a mixture of gasps and nervous laughter, the kind of response that reveals an audience's complicity and prejudice, even as they pretend to be shocked by it, while cameras captured every moment for social media posts that would soon spread the comedian's words far beyond the confines of the ballroom where they had been spoken. Ronaldo felt his jaw clench as he processed what he had just heard, his mind immediately going to teammates and friends who were Muslim, to the countless interactions he had had with people whose faith was being reduced to a punchline for the entertainment of people who had never bothered to learn anything meaningful about Islam beyond the stereotypes that made them feel superior and afraid at the same time. And he looked around the room to see how others were responding, noting the uncomfortable shifting in seats, the forced smiles, and the few people who were laughing genuinely, as if they had been waiting for someone to finally say what they had been thinking, but were too polite to voice in public. Bradley wasn't finished, emboldened by what he interpreted as approval from an audience that was too polite or too complicit to stop him. And don't you love how they always talk about peace while their kids are named after explosives? Mohammed, Ahmed, it's like a terrorist baby name generator. And this time the gasps outnumbered the laughs. But the comedian pressed on, apparently believing that doubling down on offensive material was better than admitting he had crossed a line that should never have been approached, let alone crossed in front of an audience that included people who worked with Muslim colleagues, lived in diverse communities, and should have known better than to treat prejudice as entertainment. The breaking point came when Bradley launched into a crude impression of a Muslim prayer, contorting his body into a mockery of prostration, while speaking in gibberish that was supposed to sound like Arabic, a performance so deeply offensive and ignorant that even the most polite members of the audience began to shift uncomfortably. But it was the laughter that followed, the genuine amusement of people who found religious mockery entertaining, that finally pushed Ronaldo beyond the limits of his patience and tolerance for the kind of casual bigotry that masqueraded as humor in circles where people should have known better. Without warning, Ronaldo stood up from his table, the scrape of his chair audible even over the comedian's continued performance, and every head in the room turned to watch as one of the most recognizable faces in the world walked with purpose toward the stage, his expression dark with an anger that made several people reach for their phones to record what was clearly about to become a moment that would be replayed and analyzed for years to come, though none of them could have predicted the precision and power of what Ronaldo was about to deliver. "Excuse me," Ronaldo said as he reached the stage, his voice carrying clearly through the ballroom's sound system as he took the microphone from a comedian who was too shocked to resist. "I think you're done here." And Bradley stepped back with the look of someone who had just realized that his attempt at edgy humor had attracted the attention of someone who was not amused and not inclined to let casual racism pass without consequences, even in a room full of people who were supposed to be the good guys, the charitable celebrities who cared about making the world a better place. The silence that followed was complete, hundreds of people holding their breath as they waited to see what would happen next. Cameras capturing every moment as Ronaldo looked out at an audience that had been complicit in bigotry disguised as entertainment. His presence on stage transforming the atmosphere from uncomfortable amusement to the kind of tension that comes when someone finally decides to speak truth to power, or in this case, to speak basic human decency to people who had temporarily forgotten what that looked like. "I want everyone in this room to understand something," Ronaldo began, his voice calm, but carrying the kind of authority that made even the most powerful people in attendance listen carefully. "What you just heard wasn't comedy, it was prejudice. And your laughter wasn't entertainment. It was participation in the kind of thinking that makes the world worse for millions of people who deserve better than to have their faith mocked by someone who clearly knows nothing about it and cares less about the damage his ignorance can cause." The comedian tried to interject, to defend his material as just jokes that weren't meant to hurt anyone, but Ronaldo cut him off with a look that made it clear this was not a discussion but a correction, a moment of education that was long overdue, in a room full of people who prided themselves on their progressive values while laughing at humor that reinforced the very prejudices they claimed to oppose. And the silence stretched as everyone waited to see how far Ronaldo was willing to push this confrontation. "I have teammates who are Muslim," he continued, his voice growing stronger as he found his rhythm. "Friends who pray 5 times a day, who fast during Ramadan, who live their lives according to principles of peace and compassion that would shame most of the people in this room. And when you laugh at jokes that reduce their faith to terrorism and their prayers to airport security concerns, you're not just insulting them, you're revealing something ugly about yourselves that expensive clothes and charity donations can't hide." Someone in the audience called out that it was just comedy, that people needed to lighten up and not take everything so seriously. But Ronaldo turned toward the voice with an expression that made the speaker sink back into their seat, clearly unprepared for the intensity of response their casual dismissal had provoked from someone who was not interested in letting bigotry hide behind the defense of humor, no matter how uncomfortable that made people who preferred their prejudice to remain polite and unexamined. Just comedy? Ronaldo repeated, his voice carrying the kind of scorn that made everyone in the room examine their own complicity. Tell that to the Muslim children who hear these jokes and learn that their faith makes them targets for mockery. Tell that to the families who face discrimination because people like you think prejudice is funny as long as it's dressed up as entertainment. Tell that to anyone who has ever been made to feel less human because of what they believe, or how they worship, or where they come from. The ballroom had become a courtroom, with Ronaldo serving as both prosecutor and judge, holding up a mirror to an audience that had come expecting to feel good about themselves through charity, but instead found themselves confronted with the reality of their own prejudices, their own willingness to laugh at others' expense, their own failure to live up to the values they claimed to hold, when those values required actual courage rather than just writing checks to causes that made them look good in magazine profiles. Bradley tried one more time to salvage the situation, claiming that his jokes were equal opportunity, that he made fun of everyone regardless of race or religion. But Ronaldo wasn't interested in the standard comedian's defense of prejudice disguised as fairness. The tired argument that bigotry becomes acceptable when it's distributed equally among all target groups, as if pain and humiliation were somehow neutralized when they were spread around to hurt as many people as possible. Equal opportunity prejudice is still prejudice, Ronaldo said, his words cutting through the comedian's excuses like a knife through paper, and hiding behind comedy doesn't make ignorance clever or hatred acceptable. It just makes you a coward who attacks people while pretending it's all just fun, while counting on your audience to be too polite or too complicit to call you out for the damage you're doing to communities that have enough real problems without having to deal with your manufactured hatred. The moment that would be replayed millions of times came when Ronaldo turned back to the audience, his gaze sweeping across faces that had gone from amused to uncomfortable to ashamed, as they realized they were being held accountable, not just for their laughter, but for their silence, for their willingness to let bigotry pass unchallenged as long as it was entertaining, for their failure to consider the real-world consequences of treating other people's dignity as material for amusement. "This is what privilege looks like," he said, his voice carrying to every corner of the room where some of the most powerful people in entertainment sat in silence. Sitting in rooms like this, wearing clothes that cost more than most people's cars, writing checks to feel good about yourselves while laughing at jokes that dehumanize the very people you claim to want to help, and thinking that your good intentions excuse your bad behavior, that your charity work gives you permission to participate in the kind of casual cruelty that makes the world worse for everyone who doesn't look like you or think like you or worship like you. Someone tried to start applause, perhaps hoping to diffuse the tension or show support for Ronaldo's stand, but he held up his hand to stop them, making it clear that this wasn't a moment for easy redemption or quick forgiveness, that the discomfort everyone was feeling was exactly what they needed to feel if they were going to learn anything from this experience. If they were going to do better in the future than they had done tonight when they had chosen laughter over decency. "Don't applaud," he said firmly. "Think, examine yourselves. Ask why you were willing to laugh at prejudice when it was packaged as comedy. Ask what that says about your character and your values. Ask how you're going to do better tomorrow than you did tonight, because that's the only way this room full of powerful people becomes anything more than a gathering of well-dressed bigots, congratulating themselves for their generosity, while participating in the very hatred that creates the problems they claim to want to solve." The comedian had long since left the stage, his career effectively ended by 5 minutes of exposure to someone who refused to let ignorance hide behind humor. And the audience sat in the kind of silence that comes when people are forced to confront uncomfortable truths about themselves, when the mirror they've been avoiding is suddenly held up so close they can't look away from what it reveals about their character and their choices. Ronaldo handed the microphone back to the stunned event organizer and walked off the stage without another word. leaving behind an audience that would spend the rest of the evening and many days afterward trying to process what they had witnessed, trying to understand how a charity gala had become a moment of moral reckoning that would force them to examine their own complicity in the very problems they had gathered to address through their carefully tax-deductible generosity. The footage of Ronaldo's intervention spread across social media within hours, shared by millions of people who had never seen a celebrity use their platform to challenge prejudice so directly and completely, who had grown accustomed to careful statements and diplomatic language rather than the kind of moral clarity that Ronaldo had displayed when he refused to let bigotry masquerade as entertainment, even in a room full of people who were supposed to be the good guys, the charitable celebrities who cared about making the world better. In the days that followed, the comedian's career imploded as venues canceled his bookings and sponsors dropped their contracts. But more importantly, conversations began in boardrooms and production offices about the kind of material that had been accepted as normal entertainment, about the responsibility that comes with platforms and audiences, about the difference between comedy that challenges power and comedy that reinforces prejudice by targeting people who already face discrimination and hatred in their daily lives. For Ronaldo, the incident became another reminder that fame comes with responsibilities that extend far beyond athletic performance, that having a global platform means using it to defend people who can't always defend themselves, that sometimes the most important victories happen off the field, when someone with influence chooses to speak up rather than staying silent, even when that silence would be easier and more comfortable for everyone involved. The charity gala raised less money than expected that year, but it accomplished something more valuable than financial donations. It forced a room full of powerful people to confront their own prejudices and consider their role in either perpetuating or challenging the casual racism that had been hiding behind smiles and laughter. And in doing so, it created ripple effects that would extend far beyond one uncomfortable evening in one expensive ballroom where someone finally had the courage to say that bigotry is never funny, no matter how well dressed the audience or how charitable the setting.